The door of Red Fork Diner swung open at 2:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. Dorothy Harmon walked in, 78 years old, hands trembling at her sides. A blue cardigan with wooden buttons, the kind that had been washed so many times the color had softened from cornflour to something closer to sky at dusk. The fabric was thin at the elbows. Decades of leaning on kitchen counters and garden fences had rubbed the wool down to almost nothing. Her wedding ring caught the light from the window. 53 years of wear had made the gold thin in places, but she would sooner cut off her finger than remove it. Her wrist bore bruises, purple and yellow marks that looked exactly like fingerprints, as if someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave their signature on her skin. 8 men sat in the back booth, leather vests, patches that read Iron Covenant Motorcycle Club, coffee cups scattered across the table, half-eaten burgers on plates pushed to the side. They were laughing about something, voices low and comfortable, the way old friends do when they have known each other long enough that silence is never awkward and humor needs no explanation. Dorothy did not hesitate. She walked straight toward them. Every step looked painful. Her breathing was shallow and labored. She stopped at the edge of their booth, and the largest man looked up. His name was Rex Calloway. Everyone called him Stone. 52 years old, 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle. Gray streaked through his beard, eyes that had seen too much of the world's darkness, but somehow still held light. Dorothy's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Please, I need help. My caregiver told me to stay quiet." The laughter died. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward this elderly woman who stood before them like she was presenting herself for judgment, like she had walked 2 blocks on arthritic legs and a failing heart just to reach this moment. Like everything in her life had been moving toward this single Tuesday afternoon. Stone stood immediately, 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle moving with surprising gentleness. "Ma'am, take my seat." The other men shifted without being asked. They formed a protective circle around the booth as Dorothy sank into the vinyl seat Stone had vacated. The diner went quiet. Conversations at other tables trailed off. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed to pause. Stone knelt beside the booth so he was at eye level with her. "I'm Stone. These are my brothers. You're safe here. Can you tell me what happened?" Dorothy's hands shook as she pulled back the sleeve of her cardigan. The bruises on her wrist were unmistakable, fingerprint-shaped, clear as photographs. Evidence of someone gripping her hard enough to leave marks that had not faded in days. But to understand how Dorothy Harmon ended up in that diner booth, we need to go back. Back to the life she had before everything fell apart. Back to Earl. Earl Harmon had been Dorothy's husband for 53 years. He was not a complicated man in the way that complicated men announce themselves. He was complicated the way good soil is complicated. Quiet on the surface, alive underneath. He had served in the Korean War with the 1st Cavalry Division's 7th Cavalry Regiment in the brutal winter of 1951. He came home with stories he never told and nightmares that woke him until the day he died. 14 months ago, lung cancer. The kind that eats you from the inside out, slow and merciless. The kind that gives you just enough time to say goodbye, but never enough time to say everything that needs to be said. They had lived in a white cottage on Sycamore Lane in Hargrove, a small coastal town in Northern California where everyone knew everyone and secrets were currency. The house was nothing from the outside. White paint, blue shutters. A garden in the backyard that Earl had planted himself when he retired 20 years ago. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs, basil and rosemary and thyme. Earl would spend hours out there with his hands in the soil. Said it helped him forget things he wanted to forget. Said the earth did not judge a man for what he had done in war. After he died, the garden grew wild. Dorothy did not have the strength to maintain it. Did not have the heart either. Looking at those overgrown plants reminded her that Earl's hands had touched that soil. And now his hands were gone. The house still held pieces of him. His favorite coffee mug sat on the kitchen shelf. Dark blue ceramic with a chip on the handle from the time he dropped it rushing to answer the phone. Dorothy could not bring herself to use it, could not bring herself to put it away either. It just sat there, a small monument to a man who used to drink coffee at that counter every morning at 6. Photos lined the mantel. Earl in his dress uniform. Young and serious. The kind of serious that comes from being 19 years old and watching friends die in frozen Korean mountains. Their wedding day, both of them smiling like they knew something the rest of the world did not. Dorothy in a simple white dress her mother had sewn, Earl in a borrowed suit that was slightly too big in the shoulders. An American flag folded in a perfect triangle sat in a shadow box on the bookshelf, the flag from his funeral, the one presented to Dorothy with words she would never forget. On behalf of a grateful nation. Their daughter Susan lived in Portland now, 45 years old, a nurse practitioner at a hospital there. Good work, good life. But 7 years had passed since they had spoken properly. The relationship had fractured slowly, and then all at once, the way ice breaks in spring quietly and then catastrophically. Susan had moved to Portland for work when she was 38. Dorothy had taken it personally. "You are abandoning us." That is what Dorothy had said. Words she regretted the moment they left her mouth but could never take back. Then Earl got sick. Susan flew home when she heard the diagnosis. Lung cancer stage 4. 3 to 6 months, maybe less. The argument happened on the third night of Susan's visit. Dorothy wanted to care for Earl at home, wanted him to die in the bed where they had slept together for 50 years. Susan wanted hospice, professional care, nurses who knew how to manage pain. Both of them were right. Both of them were wrong. The words that came out were ugly, the kind of words families say when they are terrified of losing someone they love, when fear turns to anger because anger is easier than grief. "You always think you know best," Susan had shouted. "You would rather let Dad suffer than admit you cannot do this alone." And Dorothy had shouted back, "You left. You moved across the country. You do not get to come back now and tell me how to take care of my own husband." Susan packed her bags that night, left before morning. She did not come back for the funeral. She did not come back at all. Dorothy told herself she did not care. Told herself Susan had made her choice. But late at night when the house was quiet and Earl's chair sat empty in the living room, Dorothy would think about Susan as a little girl, running through that garden laughing at nothing. The way children laugh when the world is still simple and parents are still invincible. Those were the nights Dorothy cried. Earl died on a Thursday morning in October. Dorothy was holding his hand. His breathing had been getting shallower for days. The home nurse said it would not be long, said he probably could not hear anymore, said the body shuts down in stages. But Dorothy talked to him anyway. She told him about the garden, how the tomatoes were coming in strong, how she had made sauce from them, just the way he liked. She told him about the birds at the feeder, about nothing and everything, because 53 years of marriage meant you could talk about nothing and it would still mean something. His last words came around 3 in the morning. "Stand up for what is right, Dot, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard." Then his hand went slack in hers, and Dorothy Harmon became a widow. The funeral was full military honors, a flag-draped casket, a bugler playing taps, 7 rifles firing 3 volleys into the gray October sky, Marines in dress uniforms folding the flag with the precision corners, tucked edges sharp. Dorothy did not cry at the funeral. Something inside her had gone numb, like the part of her that processed grief had simply shut down to protect her from the magnitude of what she had lost. Susan did not come. Dorothy watched the empty seats in the back of the church, watched the door that never opened, told herself it did not matter. It mattered more than Dorothy would ever admit. The months after Earl died were the hardest of her life. Simple things became mountains. Cooking for one person when you had spent 53 years cooking for 2. Remembering to take medication when there was no one to remind you. Getting to doctor appointments when your husband used to drive. The loneliness was crushing. She would sit in Earl's favorite chair, the brown recliner that still held the impression of his body and still smelled faintly of him. And she would stare at his photo on the mantel and wonder how she was supposed to keep living when half of her had been buried in the ground. Earl's military pension came every month. $3,200. Reliable as sunrise, it was enough to live on, cover the mortgage, buy groceries, keep the lights on. When Earl died, the pension transferred to her as his surviving spouse. The Department of Veterans Affairs sent a letter confirming it. That money was her lifeline. But money could not fix the forgetting. There were days when Dorothy would realize she had not eaten since breakfast. Days when she would find herself standing in the kitchen at midnight, not remembering why she had gotten out of bed. Her heart medication sat in bottles on the counter. Metoprolol for the arrhythmia, blood pressure pills. The little white tablets that kept her heart beating in rhythm. Some days she forgot to take them. Some days she took them twice because she could not remember if she had already taken them. The neighbors noticed. Ruth from next door would see Dorothy wandering in the overgrown garden at odd hours, talking to plants that had long since died, standing at the mailbox for 20 minutes as if she had forgotten what she came out for. Someone should do something, Ruth told her husband. That woman is going to hurt herself. But no one did anything. That is how it works in neighborhoods. Everyone sees, no one acts. Everyone assumes someone else will handle it. That is when Dorothy decided to hire help. The agency was called Sunrise Elder Care Solutions. Their website looked professional. Testimonials from satisfied families. Photos of caregivers smiling with elderly clients. 5 stars on every review. Dorothy called the number on a Wednesday afternoon. Her hands were shaking. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat, like admitting Earl was really gone and she really could not manage alone. A woman answered with a pleasant voice, took down Dorothy's information, asked questions about her needs, mobility, medications, meal preparation, transportation. We have someone perfect for you, the woman said. Her name is Carol Steins, certified, experienced, excellent references. She can start Monday. Dorothy hung up feeling something she had not felt in months. Hope. Carol Steins arrived on a Monday morning at 8 sharp. She drove a white Toyota Camry, clean and professional. She wore scrubs and carried a folder with paperwork and credentials. 35 years old, pretty in an unremarkable way, the kind of face you would not remember in a crowd, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Eyes that seemed kind, seemed being the operative word. Mrs. Harmon Carroll said, extending her hand, "It is so nice to meet you. I have heard wonderful things about you." Dorothy did not know what wonderful things anyone could have said, but the flattery felt nice. It felt like someone was paying attention to her for the first time since Earl died. The first month was everything Dorothy had hoped for. Carol arrived each morning at 8. She cooked breakfast, scrambled eggs the way Dorothy liked them, not too runny, toast with butter, coffee that was always the right temperature. She helped with laundry, folding clothes with care, organizing them in drawers, the way Dorothy had always organized them, noticing the small details that mattered. She drove Dorothy to doctor appointments, sat in the waiting room, took notes when the doctor spoke so Dorothy would not forget important details. She seemed genuinely caring. She laughed at Dorothy's stories about Earl, asked to see photo albums, sat on the couch for hours looking at pictures of their wedding, their anniversary trips, Earl in his uniform, Earl in the garden. "Tell me about this one," Carol would say, pointing to a photo. And Dorothy would talk, would remember, would feel for a moment like Earl was not entirely gone because someone was listening to stories about him. Carol asked about the garden Earl had planted, how Dorothy missed working in the soil, how arthritis made it impossible now, how the tomatoes had died because no one was there to water them. "We should plant something new," Carol suggested. "Something easy. I will help you." Dorothy smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. She had no idea it would become her worst nightmare. What Dorothy did not know was what happened on the phone at 11:30 on a Thursday night during that first perfect month. Carol sat in her car in the diner parking lot 3 blocks away, engine running, voice low. The person on the other end was not a family member, was not a friend. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. "She's easier than the last one," Carol said. "Pension comes every month, 3,200. She trusts me completely. Signed over everything I asked. Give me 3 months, maybe 4. Then I'm done." Carol ended the call, checked her makeup in the rearview mirror, smiled at her own reflection. Dorothy was sitting at home in Earl's chair, looking at his photograph, feeling grateful that she had finally found someone she could trust. During the second month, things began to shift. Subtle at first. Small changes that Dorothy noticed but could not quite name. The way Carol would ask questions about finances, her eyes flicking toward the mail when it arrived. The way she would mention the pension casually like she was just making conversation. 3,200 a month, Carol said one afternoon. "That is good money. Your husband really took care of you." Dorothy nodded, not thinking anything of it. "You do not need to call." Susan, Carol said another day when Dorothy mentioned wanting to reach out to her daughter. She is busy with her own life. You do not want to be a burden. The word landed like a stone in Dorothy's chest. Burden. Was that what she was? When bills arrived in the mail, Carol intercepted them. Let me handle these, she said, her voice taking on a firmer edge that Dorothy had not heard before. You should not stress about money. That is what I am here for. She asked for Dorothy's checkbook. It is safer if I hold on to this. You know how scammers target elderly people. I will make sure your account stays secure. Dorothy handed it over. Because Carol had been so kind. Because Carol seemed to know what she was doing. Because Dorothy was tired. So tired of trying to manage everything alone. By the third month, the isolation had set in like fog. Carol changed Dorothy's phone number. To stop the scammers, she explained. They call constantly. This way, only people who really need to reach you will have the new number. Except Carol never gave the new number to anyone. Not to Ruth next door, who used to check on Dorothy. Not to the few friends Dorothy had left from church. Not to the doctor's office. And certainly not to Susan. When neighbors came by asking about Dorothy, Carol met them at the door with a concerned smile. She needs quiet and rest, Carol would say. Doctor's orders. She is not receiving visitors right now. The neighbors nodded understanding and gradually stopped asking. Dorothy found herself more alone than she had ever been, even when Carol was in the house, because Carol had stopped sitting with her, stopped looking at photo albums, stopped asking about Earl. Now Carol spent hours in the guest bedroom with the door closed, said she was doing paperwork, said she was managing Dorothy's affairs, said Dorothy should not worry about the details. The change happened so gradually that Dorothy kept second-guessing herself. Was she imagining the coldness in Carol's voice? Was she being paranoid? Was her mind failing in ways she could not see? Carol convinced Dorothy to sign a power of attorney. Just for emergencies, she said. If something happens and you cannot make decisions, someone needs to be able to act on your behalf. I am here every day. It makes sense. Dorothy signed the papers because it did make sense, or it seemed to at the time. She was tired, confused, missing Earl, missing Susan, missing the person she used to be before grief hollowed her out. She signed because she trusted Carol, and trust is the sharpest weapon a predator can wield. The fourth month brought financial exploitation that Dorothy would not recognize until much later. Earl's pension deposits went into an account Carol now controlled. Dorothy's credit cards, the ones Carol said she would keep secure, were being used for purchases Dorothy never made. Designer handbags, expensive dinners at restaurants Dorothy had never heard of, jewelry from stores she had only seen in commercials. When Dorothy asked about the bills, Carol became cold, dismissive. I am managing your finances. That is what you hired me for. Do you not trust me? Dorothy stammered, I do not remember buying. You are confused, Carol cut her off. That is why I handle the money. So you do not have to worry about things you cannot remember. Dorothy stopped asking questions after that, because maybe she was confused. Maybe she was forgetting things. Maybe the grief and the loneliness had finally broken something in her brain that could not be fixed. The physical abuse started in the fifth month. It began small the way abuse always begins. A grabbed arm when Dorothy walked too slowly. A shove toward a chair when Carol was impatient. Words that cut deeper than hands. You are useless, Carol said one afternoon. You know that? Cannot even remember to take your own pills without someone reminding you. And then the day Dorothy asked about her pension one too many times. She was sitting at the kitchen table, looking at a bank statement she had found in the trash. The numbers did not make sense. The balance was too low. Much too low for someone who received $3,200 every month and spent almost nothing, Dorothy said, her voice trembling. Where is my money going? Carol's hands shot out, gripped Dorothy's wrist hard enough that Dorothy cried out. Hard enough to leave bruises that would last for weeks. Stop asking about money, Carol hissed, her face close to Dorothy's. Eyes that Dorothy had once thought were kind, now flat and cold as winter pavement. You are confused. You are old. You do not understand how finances work anymore. You are hurting me, Dorothy whispered. Carol squeezed harder. If you are going to cause problems, maybe you do not need your medication today. She released Dorothy's wrist, walked to the counter where the pill bottles sat, picked them up, held them just out of reach. These pills keep you alive. Did you know that without them, your heart could just stop? Please. Dorothy said. I need those, then stop asking questions. The bedroom door started locking from the outside that same week. Dorothy heard the installation happening. Drill sounds, metal against wood. When she asked what was happening, Carol explained with a cold smile. For your own safety, you wander at night. I do not want you falling and hurting yourself. But Dorothy did not wander. She lay in bed, counting ceiling cracks, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of captivity pressing down on her chest. The lock clicked every night after Carol put her to bed, and every morning Dorothy would wake to the sound of that lock opening. Carol's face in the doorway, that smile that no longer seemed warm. Good morning, Mrs. Harmon. Time to start another day. It was during the 5th month on a Tuesday morning when Carol had gone to run errands that Dorothy noticed something. She had gotten up slowly, made her way to the kitchen, looked at her medication bottles on the counter the way she had looked at them 1,000 times. But this time something made her stop. Really stop. Look. The pills inside did not look right. She had taken metoprolol for years. Small, round, pale pink. These pills were white, oval, wrong. Dorothy moved to the computer in the living room. The one Carol said she should not use because it was too complicated. She sat down. Her fingers were slow on the keyboard. Arthritic, deliberate. She typed the markings she saw on the pills. Multivitamins. Generic store brand, multivitamins. Dorothy sat very still for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and went quiet. She thought about her arrhythmia, the irregular heartbeat that metoprolol kept steady, the blood pressure that the other pills kept in range. Conditions that required daily medication to keep her alive. All managed for weeks now with nothing but supplements and lies. She could have died. She could still die any day without warning. Her heart could simply stop because the medication keeping it steady had been replaced by something that did nothing. Dorothy closed the laptop slowly. She did not say anything when Carol came home that afternoon. She ate the dinner Carol prepared, said thank you. Watched Carol move around the kitchen with that efficient, cheerful efficiency that now looked to Dorothy like a mask worn over a hollow face. She nodded when Carol said goodnight, heard the lock click on the bedroom door. Then she lay in the dark looking at the ceiling, counting the cracks. She thought about what she had found, thought about what it meant, thought about the bruises on her wrist and the money that kept disappearing, and the phone number that no one she loved could reach anymore. She thought about Ruth next door who had stopped coming by. She thought about Susan somewhere in Portland, probably believing her mother had given up on her, probably thinking the silence was intentional. She thought about Earl. His voice came to her in the dark. Stand up for what is right, Dot. She pressed her hand flat against the mattress, felt the weight of the house around her, the lock on the door, the empty pill bottles in the kitchen. The bank statements that told a story she did not want to believe. 100 days, Dorothy thought. She had been counting. 100 days since Carol Steins walked through her front door with a warm smile and a folder full of credentials and eyes that seemed kind. 100 days of a life being dismantled piece by piece, while Dorothy told herself she was confused, told herself she was imagining things, told herself that this was what getting old looked like and she had no right to expect anything better. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark and made a list. Not on paper, in her head. Because Earl had always said a soldier knows two things: what the enemy wants and what you still have. What Carol wanted was clear. What Dorothy still had was less obvious, but it was there. She could feel it, small and quiet like a pilot light that had not gone out. Not yet. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the darkness, sat Earl's old tape recorder. The one he had used during his second deployment training, recording himself reading letters so Dorothy could hear his voice when he was away. She had kept it for 30 years. It still worked. She had checked it once months ago before Carol arrived, just to hear his voice on the old cassettes. Dorothy looked at the tape recorder in the dark, and something shifted inside her. Something that had been dormant for 100 days. Something that had survived 53 years of marriage and one brutal Korean winter and 14 months of widowhood and 5 months of systematic abuse. Something that sounded very quietly like Earl's voice, even when it is hard. The morning came gray and cold. Carol arrived at 8, same as always, made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, coffee at exactly the right temperature. She moved around the kitchen with that efficient cheerfulness that Dorothy had learned to read now like weather. Clear skies on the surface, storm underneath. Dorothy ate her breakfast, said it was delicious, said she was feeling tired and might rest this morning. Carol nodded, said she had a few errands to run, said she would be back by 4. After the front door closed, Dorothy sat in Earl's chair for a long time. Her hands rested on the armrests. She could feel the worn leather smooth in the places where his hands had always been, could smell the faint ghost of him that still lingered 14 months later. She picked up his photograph from the side table, his dress uniform, that serious expression, 19 years old and already carrying more than any young man should have to carry. She set the photograph down. Then she reached for the tape recorder. She did not have to wait long. Carol came back unexpectedly at 9:30, said she had forgotten something, moved through the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, muttered something about traffic. Dorothy sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded, the tape recorder small and invisible in the pocket of her cardigan. She pressed record. "I told you to stop asking about the money," Carol said, not looking at her, pulling something from the refrigerator shelf. Her voice was different when she thought Dorothy was too tired to matter. "Harder, flatter. If you mention it again, I will make sure you regret it." The tape caught everything. Carol left again, back to her errands, back to whatever life she was living outside these walls. Dorothy waited until the sound of the Toyota faded completely. Then she stopped the recording, rewound it a few seconds, pressed play. Carol's voice came out of the small speaker, tinny and unmistakable. "I told you to stop asking about the money. If you mention it again, I will make sure you regret it." Dorothy pressed stop. She had evidence now, real evidence, not just bruises that could be explained away, not just a confused old woman's word against a licensed professional, a voice, threats, proof, something a courtroom could hear. She stood up from Earl's chair. Her hip ached. The arthritis in her knees sent shooting pains up her legs with every step. Her heart, running for months now on nothing but multivitamins and stubborn will, fluttered irregularly in her chest. She moved to the hallway closet, found her blue cardigan, the one Earl had given her for Christmas 10 years ago. Wooden buttons, soft despite its age. She put it on. She went to the mantel and took down the wedding photograph. Her and Earl on the steps of the church. His borrowed suit, her mother's dress, both of them smiling like they knew something the rest of the world did not. She tucked it under her arm. On the side table near the door in the drawer that Carol had apparently never thought to search, she found Earl's old address book. His handwriting filled the pages. Careful and deliberate, the same handwriting he had used to label seed packets in the garden, to sign birthday cards, to write her name on the envelopes of letters sent home from training decades ago. At the top of the first page in capital letters, "In case of emergency," she found Susan's number. The old one. The one Earl had written down years before everything fell apart. She tried it on Carol's phone, the one with the new number no one knew. The automated voice told her the number was disconnected. She tried Ruth next door. No answer. The church friends. No answer. Each failed call felt like a door slamming in a corridor she had not realized was getting narrower. Dorothy set the phone down. She stood in the living room for a moment. Earl's flag in its shadow box, his coffee mug on the shelf, the overgrown garden visible through the back window, going brown now in the autumn chill. She thought about something Earl had told her years ago, about a buddy from the service, a man who had struggled after Vietnam when the VA stopped returning his calls. Some men on motorcycles had shown up at his house, had made sure the government kept its promises. She remembered Earl's exact words. "Dangerous people are sometimes the safest people, Dot. They understand loyalty. They understand what it means to have someone's back." Earlier that week, Carol had driven past Red Fork Diner on the way to the pharmacy. Dorothy had looked out the window, had seen motorcycles parked outside, 8 of them, chrome gleaming in the pale afternoon sun. Dorothy checked the clock. 2:15 in the afternoon. Carol would return at 4, less than 2 hours. Red Fork Diner was 2 blocks away. 2 blocks of sidewalk. 2 blocks of putting one foot in front of the other, with arthritic joints and a heart running on nothing but willpower. She could not drive. Carol had taken her license months ago, said the DMV required retesting at her age, said Dorothy had failed. Except Dorothy had never taken any test. 2 blocks. It might as well have been 2 miles. She found a scrap of paper on the counter, picked up a pen. Her handwriting was shaky but legible. She wrote, "If I do not come back, Carol Steins did it." She tucked the note under the cushion of Earl's chair, where Carol would not find it unless she was looking. Then Dorothy Harmon walked out her front door. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, the first real sunlight she had felt in weeks. Carol kept the curtains closed, said the light hurt Dorothy's eyes, said she needed to rest. The air smelled like cut grass and something faintly like the ocean, even though the beach was 3 miles away. Dorothy stood on her front step for a moment, blinking. Then she started walking. 1 block. She passed Ruth's house. The curtains were drawn. A jack-o'-lantern sat on the porch 2 weeks past Halloween, its carved face caving in on itself. Dorothy kept walking. Her hip sent pain up into her lower back with every step. Her knees ached, her heart beat in its unsteady, irregular way, the rhythm that medications had kept smooth for years and that vitamins did nothing for. She kept walking. The diner appeared ahead, a low building with a neon sign. Red Fork Diner, established 1961. The motorcycles were still there, 8 of them lined up in the parking lot like soldiers at attention, chrome catching the autumn light. Dorothy stopped at the door. Her hand rested on the handle, cold metal against her palm. Through the glass, she could see them. Men in leather vests, laughing, eating, living their ordinary Tuesday afternoon. What if they did not believe her? What if they called the police, who called Carol, who explained that Dorothy was confused and elderly and prone to wandering? What if this was a mistake? What if she had walked 2 blocks on a failing heart for nothing? She thought about Earl. Stand up for what is right. She pulled open the door and stepped inside. The warmth of the diner wrapped around her, the smell of coffee and grilled onions, country music low and distant from a speaker near the counter. The man behind the counter looked up. The couples at the nearby tables glanced her way and returned to their meals. Dorothy walked straight to the back booth. 8 men looked up at her, leather vests, patches, beards, and hands that looked like they had seen hard work and harder fights. Everything about them should have frightened her, but their eyes were kind. She had learned over 78 years to read eyes. Earl's eyes had been kind too, even when he came back from Korea with darkness living behind them. The kindness was always there underneath. These men had the same look. So she stopped at the edge of their booth. The largest man, gray streaking through his beard, looked at her with an expression she had not seen in 101 days. He looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth looking at, like she was a person and not a problem to be managed. She opened her mouth. "Please," she said, "I need help. My caregiver told me to stay quiet." The laughter stopped. And everything that would come next, everything that would bring a predator to justice and return a daughter to her mother, and honor a debt made in fire on a Korean battlefield. In 1951, everything began with those 12 words spoken by a 78-year-old woman in a blue cardigan who had walked 2 blocks on a broken heart and refused after 101 days to be quiet for one more minute. Stone looked at the woman sitting in his booth and saw his mother. Not literally. His mother had been dead for 5 years. Found dehydrated and confused in a nursing home while he was working overtime trying to pay for her care. Dead 3 days later from complications that never should have happened. He saw his mother in the trembling hands, in the bruises shaped like fingers, in the way this woman held herself like she expected to be hit for speaking. Ma'am, Stone said, his voice soft despite his size. "I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Dorothy Harmon looked at the 8 men surrounding her booth. Leather vests and patches and beards and hands that looked like they had built things and broken things in equal measure. Everything about them should have frightened her, but their eyes were kind. She had learned over 78 years to read eyes. So she told them. She started with Earl, because everything started with Earl. 53 years of marriage, the Korean War, the garden he planted when he retired, the cancer that took him 14 months ago. She told them about Susan, her daughter in Portland, 7 years of silence after an argument about hospice care. Words that could not be taken back. A funeral Susan did not attend. She told them about the loneliness, the forgetting, the days when she could not remember if she had eaten, the nights she talked to Earl's photograph because there was no one else to talk to. Then she told them about Carol Steins, the agency with the 5-star reviews, the warm smile that turned cold, The isolation that crept in like fog until Dorothy could not see her way out. The money gone, the medication replaced with vitamins, her heart running on nothing but luck and stubbornness for months. The bruises, the locked door, the threats. If you tell anyone they will put you in a nursing home, is that what you want, to die alone in some facility where nobody knows your name? The diner was silent when she finished. Joe Kaminsky stood behind the counter with a dish towel in his hands, frozen, listening. A couple at a nearby table had stopped eating. The woman had tears running down her face. A man named Doc Mercer leaned forward, former paramedic, 47 years old, with steady hands and eyes that had seen enough injuries to catalog them the way other people catalog memories. "Mrs. Harmon," he said, "those bruises on your wrists, may I look at them more closely?" Dorothy extended her arms, pulled back her sleeves. Doc examined the marks with professional care, but his jaw tightened as he worked through what he was seeing. "These are restraint injuries," he said quietly. "Someone grabbed you with significant force, multiple times based on the layering. Some of these are a week old. Some are more recent." He looked at Stone. "There may be more injuries we cannot see." Dorothy nodded slowly. "She grabs my arms when I ask questions. Sometimes she shoves me. Once she would not let me use the bathroom until I promised to stop talking about my pension." Stone's hands curled into fists on the table. The kind of controlled anger that came from years of learning to channel rage into something useful instead of something destructive. A man named Badge Holloway spoke up, 44 years old, former police officer who had left the force when he discovered his captain was taking bribes from drug dealers. The corruption had broken something in him, his faith in the system, his belief that the badge meant what it was supposed to mean. Now he rode with Iron Covenant and did the work that badges should have done. "Mrs. Harmon," he said, "do you have any documentation, bank statements, receipts, anything that proves what she has been taking?" Dorothy reached into her cardigan pocket, pulled out folded papers. Her hands shook as she smoothed them on the table. "I found these in the garage, hidden behind boxes. She must have forgotten about them." Badge examined the receipts. His eyebrows rose with each one. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he looked at Stone. "These are all in her name. Her credit cards." He looked at Dorothy. "She has power of attorney. I signed it," Dorothy said. "I did not understand what I was signing. I thought it was for emergencies." "That is fraud," Badge said. "Exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Felony charges." He looked at Stone again. "This is not impulsive. This is organized, calculated." She knew exactly what she was doing from the beginning. A man at the end of the booth had been quiet through the entire conversation. Raymond Denton. Everyone called him Forge. 55 years old, gray at his temples, hands scarred from decades of mechanical work. He had been watching Dorothy with an intensity that made the other men glance at him, occasionally uncertain what was moving behind his eyes. Now he spoke. "Mrs. Harmon, your husband, you said his name was Earl." Dorothy's voice softened the way it always did when she talked about Earl. "Yes, Earl Harmon. Everyone called him Earl. He served with the 1st Cavalry Division, 7th Cavalry Regiment. He was at Enshon in 1951. He never talked about it much, but I know it changed him." Forge went absolutely still. The color drained from his face. His hands gripped the edge of the table hard enough that his knuckles turned white. The other men noticed. They had known Forge for years, had seen him in situations that would have broken other people. They had never seen him look like this. "What was his unit specifically?" Forge asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dorothy thought for a moment. "I am not sure of the exact designation. He mentioned Task Force Denton once or twice, said it like the name meant something." Forge finished the sentence before she could say more. "Task Force Denton." Dorothy looked at him. "Yes. How did you know that?" The table went silent. Forge's eyes were wet. This 55-year-old man who had survived more than most people would ever know was sitting in a diner booth with tears running down the lines of his weathered face. "My name is Raymond Denton," he said. "The task force was named after my grandfather. He was the commanding officer at Incheon. I grew up on his stories about Korea, every single one. He told them to me from the time I was 6 years old until the day he died." Dorothy's heart stuttered in her chest. Forge continued. "My grandfather spent 30 years trying to find a soldier named Earl Harmon. Their armored personnel carrier took heavy fire during the assault. The engine caught, started burning. My grandfather was trapped inside. The hatch was jammed from the outside, warped from the heat. He was going to burn to death. And a young private reached through the beams and grabbed him, pulled him through that hatch. The fire had spread to the opening by then. The soldier burned his own hands getting my grandfather out. Never complained, never reported it, never asked for recognition or commendation. Forge reached across the table. He took Dorothy's hands in his scarred ones. My grandfather looked for Earl Harmon after the war, he said. Military records were a mess in those years. Names got confused, addresses changed, people moved and did not leave forwarding information. He hired people to search, spent money he did not have. He never found him. He died 10 years ago, still grateful, still talking about the young private who reached into the fire. Dorothy was crying now, tears she had not let fall in months, maybe years, running freely down her face. He never told me, she whispered. He never talked about what happened there. That is how men like him were, Forge said. They did what was right because it was right. Not for recognition, not for thanks, not so someone would remember. He squeezed her hands. Your husband saved my grandfather's life. That means he gave my family everything that came after. Every year my grandfather lived. My father being born, me being born. He looked at Stone. This woman is under our protection. Whatever she needs, whatever it takes, we do this, Stone nodded slowly. The connection had changed everything. What had begun as helping a stranger had become something older and deeper. A debt made in fire on a Korean hillside in 1951. These men understood debts like that. They understood what it meant to owe something that money could not repay. Mrs. Harmon, Stone said, we are going to help you, all of us, but first I need you to answer one question. Dorothy wiped her eyes. What time does Carol come back to your house? She looked at the clock above the counter. Usually 4, she said. It is 3:10 now. Stone looked at his brothers. 50 minutes. Let us move. Dorothy stood up from the booth. Her legs were steadier than they had been in months. Something had shifted inside her. The fear was still there, but it was no longer alone. It had company now. I'm coming with you, she said. The bikers exchanged looks. Stone opened his mouth carefully. Mrs. Harmon, it might be safer if you stayed here. 2 of my men can protect you while we handle things at the house. No, the word came out stronger than Dorothy expected. This is my fight. Earl taught me that you do not let other people fight your battles. You stand beside them. Even when it is hard. She looked at Forge. Your grandfather was trapped in that APC. Earl did not wait outside while someone else pulled him out. He went in himself. Forge smiled, a real smile, the kind that changed his whole face. She has got a point, Stone. Stone studied Dorothy for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, you come with us, but you stay close. You do exactly what we say when we say it. Dorothy nodded. Stone began organizing quickly. Badge you are point on evidence collection. You know what to look for. Financial records, medication bottles, anything that documents what has been happening. Forge call, Sheriff Grady. He knows us from the Morrison situation 2 years ago. We need law enforcement aware before we arrive. Doc medical documentation. Those bruises need to be photographed properly. If this goes to court, we need evidence that holds. He turned to Dorothy. You know that house better than anyone. You know where she hides things. You know her patterns. We are going to need your help. Dorothy straightened her shoulders. I will show you everything. They moved toward the door. Joe Kaminsky called out from behind the counter. Stone, be careful. Stone looked back at the old man who had given them free coffee on slow afternoons for 8 years. Always him, Joe. They stepped out into the afternoon sun. The motorcycles gleamed in the parking lot. Stone led Dorothy to his truck, a black Ford F250 that had seen better days but ran like something that had decided not to quit out of sheer stubbornness. He opened the passenger door for her. She climbed in. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart was still fluttering in its unsteady rhythm. But something new was burning in her chest alongside the fear. It felt distantly like the thing she had felt standing at the church on the day she married Earl. The terrifying, clarifying feeling of having made a decision you could not take back. The drive to 412 Sycamore Lane took 4 minutes. Dorothy watched familiar streets pass by the window. The pharmacy where Carol picked up the fake medication. The bank where Carol had been draining her accounts. The neighbors who had stopped asking about her because a woman with a warm smile and a professional folder had told them to stay away. Everything looked different now, sharper, more real, like she had been seeing the world through fog and someone had finally cleared the glass. Stone parked 2 houses down from the cottage. The motorcycles pulled in behind him, engines cutting to silence. Forge had reached Sheriff Grady. The sheriff was on his way, but stuck behind a traffic accident on the highway. 15 minutes out. Maybe 20. They could not wait. Carol would be back at 4. They had 40 minutes. Stone gathered his brothers around the truck and went through it quickly. We go in. We document everything. We do not touch anything we do not have to touch. If Carol shows up early, nobody engages. We call the sheriff and we hold position. He looked at Dorothy. Lead the way, Mrs. Harmon. Dorothy walked toward her own house like she was approaching enemy territory. In a way she was. The cottage looked peaceful from the outside. White paint, blue shutters, the garden overgrown in the autumn chill. An ordinary home on an ordinary street. No one would ever guess what had been happening inside those walls for the past 7 months. Dorothy pulled out her key. Her hands were steadier now. The presence of these men behind her gave her something she had not felt in months. The simple physical comfort of not being alone. She unlocked the front door. The smell hit them immediately. Stale air. The particular scent of loneliness that settles into homes where people stop living and start merely existing. The living room was clean but cold, like my own. Like a waiting room, photos of Earl were everywhere, wedding pictures, military portraits, candid shots from decades of marriage. The life of a man reduced to rectangles of glass and paper on walls he would never stand in front of again. Dorothy paused at the mantel, Earl's American flag in its shadow box, the flag from his funeral, folded in the perfect triangle. She touched the glass. I am doing this for you, she whispered. Doc went straight for the kitchen. On the counter sat multiple medication bottles arranged in a neat row. He picked one up. Read the label. Metoprolol. He opened the bottle, poured several pills into his palm, and looked at them for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, searched for reference images of genuine metoprolol. These are not right, he said, his voice tight. These are multivitamins. Generic store brand. He photographed everything. The bottles, the pills, the prescription labels, every single one. He looked at Stone. All fake. She has been giving Mrs. Harmon placebos for months. He paused. This is not just abuse. Withholding cardiac medication from someone with an arrhythmia is not neglect. It is attempted murder. If her heart had gone into a serious episode, there was nothing in her system to prevent it. Nothing at all. The weight of that settled over the group like weather moving in. Badge moved to Dorothy's bedroom. The room was small and sparse. A thin mattress on a frame. No television, no radio. Curtains drawn tight against the afternoon light. On the door he found what he was looking for. He examined it carefully. Deadbolt. Installed on the outside. Key operated from the exterior. He tested it. She locked her in, he said quietly. Every night Mrs. Harmon was a prisoner in her own bedroom. Dorothy stood in the doorway watching. She told me it was for my safety, she said. Said I wandered at night, but I do not wander. I just lie there, counting the cracks in the ceiling. Badge photographed the lock, the door frame, the marks in the wood where the deadbolt had been installed. Clean professional work. Someone had taken their time with it. Then he went to the closet. Mrs. Harmon, you said the documents were hidden behind boxes. Dorothy nodded. Behind the boxes, covered with a blanket. Badge pulled out the boxes carefully. They were exactly where Dorothy had described. Bank statements going back 7 months. Credit card bills. Receipts stuffed into envelopes. He started photographing everything methodically, working through his old police training, the way you work through muscle memory. Each page documented, each receipt captured. The numbers were staggering. Designer handbags from a department store, $8,300. Jewelry from a luxury retailer, $6,200. A vacation to the Bahamas. Round-trip airfare and resort stay, $5,400. Car payments for a vehicle not registered to Dorothy, $12,000 over 6 months. Cash withdrawals from ATMs across town. 15,100 in cash alone. Badge added them up. Did it again. Came to the same number both times. $47,000, he said, in 7 months. He looked at the room around him, a sparse bedroom, a thin mattress, curtains that blocked the light. This woman lived like she had nothing while Carol Stein spent $47,000 of her money. A man named Hawk checked the guest bedroom, the room Carol used when she stayed overnight. The closet was full of expensive clothes, tags still attached to some items, boxes from high-end department stores stacked in the corner. A laptop sat on the desk, password protected. On the nightstand was a leather planner. Hawk flipped through it. He found the entry on the third page from the back. The pension amount was circled in red ink. $3,200, arrows pointing to a date 3 months in the future. Below it in Carol's handwriting, 2 words, enough, leave. Hawk brought the planner to Stone without a word, just handed it to him and waited. Stone read it again. His expression did not change on the surface, but something in his eyes went very cold. She had an exit date, Hawk said. She was going to drain the accounts and disappear. Dorothy would have been left alone in this house with no money, no medication, and a locked bedroom door. No phone number anyone could call. No one who even knew to look for her. Stone set the planner down carefully. This was not opportunity, he said. This was premeditated, planned from the beginning. Dorothy had been moving through the house slowly, touching things, remembering the life she had before Carol arrived, and took it apart piece by piece. She stopped at Carol's bathroom. Something caught her eye. She pushed the door open wider. On the counter sat prescription bottles with her name on them. Evelyn Prescott, Dorothy Harmon, the real labels, the real pharmacy name, the correct medication names. She picked one up, opened it. Pink pills, small, round, her real metoprolol. Doc, Dorothy called out, her voice steady despite everything moving through her in that moment. Doc came quickly. Dorothy held out the bottle without speaking. He took it, looked at it, compared it to the bottles from the kitchen. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not quite read. She kept the real medication in here, Dorothy said, in her own bathroom, while she gave me vitamins and told me my heart would be fine. Doc photographed the bottles, both sets, side by side, the fakes from the kitchen and the real ones from Carol's bathroom. The contrast was documented. The evidence was irrefutable. Forge had gone to the garage. He stood there for a long time looking at the space. The workbench where Earl used to build things. Tools hanging on pegboards in the organized way that men who care about their tools always organize them. Sawdust still in the corners from the last time those tools had been used because Dorothy had not had the heart to clean it. Under a tarp in the corner, he found Dorothy's car, a 2009 Honda Accord covered in dust. The license plates had been removed. When he opened the hood, he found the battery disconnected. Wires pulled free and tucked aside, not cut. Just disconnected, easily reconnected if Carol ever needed to move the car, but rendering it completely useless to Dorothy. Every exit blocked, Forge thought. Every option removed. Even if Dorothy had found the courage to leave on her own, she would have walked to this garage and found a car that would not start and no plates to identify it. Carol had thought of everything. She had been very, very careful. He thought about his grandfather trapped in the burning APC. Hatch jammed, flames spreading, no way out. Dorothy had been trapped just as completely. In her own home, in a life that had been systematically dismantled around her. He went back inside. Badge was still working through the documents in the bedroom closet when he found the folder. It was in a cardboard box pushed to the back under a folded blanket that had been placed too deliberately to be accidental. Someone had hidden this box inside a closet already used to hide other documents. Layers of concealment. The folder was manila, unmarked on the outside. Badge opened it. Documents, medical records, financial statements, but not Dorothy's. 2 other names, Margaret Olson, age 81, George Patton, age 79. Badge read through the papers slowly, then he read them again. He was a man who had trained himself not to react visibly to things that disturbed him. It was a useful skill in police work. It was useful now. Both Margaret Olson and George Patton had been clients of Sunrise Elder Care Solutions. Both had Carol Steins listed as their caregiver. Both had died within 6 months of Carol starting work. Both showed identical financial patterns in the documents Carol had kept for reasons Badge could not immediately explain patterns she had apparently felt safe enough to document. Depleted accounts, unusual purchases, large cash withdrawals. Both deaths had been ruled natural causes. Badge stood up slowly. "Stone," he said. Something in his voice made everyone in the house stop moving. "You need to see this." Stone came to the bedroom doorway. Badge handed him the folder without preamble. Stone read it. His face went pale in the way that happened when something truly cold reached you regardless of your self-control. "She has done this before," Stone said. Badge nodded. "Evelyn is not her first victim. These two people, Margaret Olson and George Patton, they died under her care. The financial pattern is identical to what she did here. Identical. Same progression. Same types of purchases. Same timing." He paused. Both deaths ruled natural causes. He looked at Dorothy, who had come to stand in the hallway. "You were going to be the third," he said. Dorothy sat down on the edge of the hallway chair, the small chair Earl had always said he was going to reupholster and never got around to. She sat very still. Outside, a car passed on the street. A dog barked somewhere in the neighborhood. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a town where most people had no idea what was happening inside this white house with the blue shutters. "She killed them," Dorothy said. The words came out barely above a whisper. "We do not know that with certainty," Badge said carefully. "But the pattern, the finances, the timing, it is identical to your situation, except you are still alive." Forge spoke from across the room. "Because you asked for help." Dorothy sat with that for a moment. 184 days. That was how long she had stayed quiet. How many mornings she had lain in bed listening for the lock to open. How many times she had decided that speaking up was too dangerous, that no one would believe her, that confusion and age had made her too unreliable to be trusted with her own truth. 184 days. Margaret Olson had apparently not made it to day 184. Neither had George Patton. "It is 3:51. Hawk's voice cut through the silence. Through the living room window, they could see a white Toyota Camry turning onto Sycamore Lane. "She is early." Everyone moved at once. Stone took command immediately. "Nobody leaves this house." Forge back door. Hawk side entrance. Badge front. "Doc, stay with Mrs. Harmon." He looked at Dorothy. "What about me?" she asked. "Stay back," Stone said. "We do not know how she will react when she sees us." "No." Dorothy stood up from the hallway chair. The same quiet, absolute firmness that had carried her 2 blocks on a failing heart and arthritic legs. "I told you," she said. "This is my fight. Earl did not wait outside while someone else pulled your grandfather from that fire. He went in himself." Forge looked at Stone. "Let her," he said quietly. "She has earned this." Stone held Dorothy's gaze for a moment, saw something in her eyes that he recognized from the hardest moments of his own life. The particular clarity that comes when fear stops being the loudest thing you feel. "All right," he said, "but you stay behind us until I say otherwise." The white Toyota Camry pulled into the driveway. Through the window, they watched Carol Steins get out. Shopping bags in her hands, Macy's logos on the sides. More purchases made with someone else's money on a Tuesday afternoon, while the woman whose money it was sat locked in a house with fake medication and a bedroom door that opened from the wrong side. Carol looked around casually as she walked toward the front door. No suspicion, no awareness that anything in her world was about to change. She unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and stopped. 8 men in leather vests stood in her living room. Dorothy Harmon stood in the middle of them. Carol's shopping bags hit the floor. What, she stammered. "What is this? Who are you?" Stone stepped forward. "We are friends of Mrs. Harmon." Carol's eyes moved rapidly, from Stone to the other bikers, to Dorothy, to the door behind her, which Hawk was now standing in front of, to the hallway where Forge stood with his arms crossed and his expression calm in the way that is more frightening than anger. "I do not." Carol tried to compose herself. She was good at this. The professional mask sliding into place, the practiced calm of someone who had talked her way out of difficult situations before. "I do not know what is happening here, but you need to leave. This is my client's home." "Your client," Doc said. "The client whose medication you replaced with vitamins?" He held up the bottles. Two sets, side by side. Fakes from the kitchen and the real ones from Carol's bathroom. Carol's mask flickered. I do not know what you are talking about. Those are her prescriptions. These are multivitamins, Doc said. I am a former paramedic. I know what metoprolol looks like. I know what generic store-brand supplements look like. Her real medication was in your bathroom. You kept her sick on purpose. You kept it as leverage. Brenda took a step backward. This is you are confused. She is confused. That is why I manage her care. She cannot be trusted to handle things herself. Badge held up the bank statements. $47,000, he said. Stolen from a widow over 7 months. Designer clothing, jewelry, vacations, car payments, all on her credit cards. All authorized by a power of attorney she signed because she trusted you. She authorized those purchases, Carol said, her voice rising now, losing some of its professional steadiness. She asked me to buy things for her. She insisted. Did she insist you lock her in her own bedroom? Stone's voice was quiet, more dangerous than if he had shouted. He pointed to the deadbolt visible on Dorothy's bedroom door. We found that lock installed on the outside. Key operated. You imprisoned her in her own home. That was for her safety, Carol said. She wanders. She could fall. She could hurt herself. And Margaret Olson Badge asked. Carol froze. George Patton Badge continued. Your other clients, the ones who died under your care. He held up the folder. Same pattern, Carol. Same financial trail, same timing. Both deaths ruled natural causes. He paused. How many times have you done this? The professional mask shattered completely. Not all at once, but in pieces, like something under too much pressure, finally giving way along its fault lines. You do not know what you are talking about, Carol said, her voice shaking now. Those people were old. They were sick. They died of natural causes. That is what old people do. They die. Then you will not mind explaining that to the sheriff, Stone said. He is on his way. Carol's eyes went wild. She bolted. Not toward the front door where Hawk stood, not toward the back where Forge was waiting. She ran toward the kitchen, toward the side door that led to the garage. The same garage where Forge had found Dorothy's car with its battery disconnected and its plates removed. Carol ran toward that door. Dorothy was standing in her path. 78 years old. Arthritic knees and a heart running without medication, and 5 feet 3 inches of a woman who had survived more than Carol Steins would ever understand. Dorothy did not step aside. Carol's face twisted. Get out of my way, she hissed. You stupid old woman. You have no idea what you have done. Nobody is going to believe you. You are old and confused and you forget things. That is all anyone will ever see when they look at you. Dorothy looked at the woman who had stolen her money and replaced her medication with vitamins and locked her bedroom door every night for months and told her she was worthless and confused and too old to matter. She reached into her cardigan pocket. Earl's tape recorder, small, worn at the edges, the same machine he had used to record his voice reading letters home during training so Dorothy could hear him when he was away. She had held on to it for 30 years. She had pressed record in this same kitchen this morning when Carol came home unexpectedly to pick something up. Dorothy pressed play. Carol's own voice filled the kitchen, tinny through the small speaker but completely unmistakably hers. I told you to stop asking about the money. If you mention it again, I will make sure you regret it. The recording continued. Every threat, every cold, flat syllable, captured on magnetic tape while Carol thought she was alone with a confused old woman who had no way to fight back. Carol's face went white. You, she whispered, you recorded me. Dorothy stopped the tape. Earl always said a good soldier documents everything. Behind Carol, Forge and Hawk had moved into position. There was nowhere left to run. Outside through the living room windows, blue and red lights were beginning to pulse in the street. Sheriff Grady's patrol car. Behind it, an unmarked sedan. A woman in a dark suit stepped out of the sedan. She walked with the particular efficiency of someone who had done this many times and felt nothing extraneous about it. She came through the front door, took in the scene without breaking stride. 8 bikers, an elderly woman with a tape recorder. Carol Steins backed against the kitchen wall with nowhere left to go. The woman in the Satro was Detective Linda Marsh, Elder Abuse Task Force out of the county office. She had been investigating Carol Steins for 6 months, ever since George Patton's daughter filed a complaint about irregular financial activity in her father's estate. The case had stalled for lack of evidence. No living witnesses, no one who could speak to what happened inside the houses where Carol Steins worked. Until now. Mrs. Harmon Marsh said, looking directly at Dorothy, "We have been building this case for 6 months. We had the financial records, we had the pattern, but we needed someone who was there, someone who survived." She paused. "Is that recording what I think it is?" Dorothy held up the tape recorder, Carol's voice threatening her. This morning, in this kitchen, Marsh looked at Carol with the particular expression of someone who has been patient for a very long time and has finally arrived at the moment that patience was for. "Mrs. Stein," she said, "we need to talk." Carol looked at the detective, at the badge, at the sheriff in the doorway with his hand resting on his belt, at the 8 bikers who had systematically documented every piece of evidence in the house over the past 40 minutes, at Dorothy Harmon, who was still holding Earl's tape recorder and standing straight despite everything her body had been put through. Carol opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. And for the first time since she had arrived at Dorothy's front door 7 months ago, with a warm smile and a folder full of credentials, she had nothing to say. Sheriff Grady stepped forward with the handcuffs. "Carol Steins," he said, "you are under arrest for elder abuse, financial exploitation assault, and unlawful imprisonment. Additional charges relating to the deaths of Margaret Olson and George Patton are pending investigation." "No," Carol said. "No, this is wrong. She is confused. She has memory problems. She is old and she forgets things and she does not understand what she is saying. Who are they going to believe? A group of bikers and a confused old woman, or a licensed professional caregiver with a spotless record?" The handcuffs clicked into place. Marsh looked at her without particular emotion. "We are going to believe the bank records," she said, "the medication evidence, the documents you kept in a box in that bedroom closet, the deadbolt on the outside of her bedroom door, the tape recording, and the testimony of 8 witnesses who found this woman with restraint injuries on her wrists." She paused. "And we are going to believe Mrs. Harmon, because she is going to tell the truth. And the truth is going to be very clear." They led Carol toward the front door. She looked back at Dorothy as they passed. Her mascara was running. The professional composure that had fooled an agency, a doctor's office, and an entire neighborhood for 7 months was entirely gone. What was left underneath it was smaller than Dorothy had expected, and colder. "You will regret this," Carol said. "I promise you that." Dorothy met her eyes. "I regret being quiet for 184 days, Dorothy said. "I will not regret a single thing I did today." They put Carol in the back of the patrol car. The blue and red lights kept flashing. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk. Ruth from next door, her hand over her mouth. The couple from down the street who had accepted Carol's explanations about Dorothy needing rest and quiet, and no visitors. They were watching the woman they had trusted being placed into a police vehicle on a Tuesday afternoon, and their faces held the particular expression of people who were beginning to understand exactly how wrong they had been. Detective Marsh stayed behind to work through the evidence with Badge. She moved through the house methodically, documenting everything that had been collected, adding her own notes and photographs to the record that had been built in the 40 minutes before Carol's early return. "This is enough for multiple felony charges," she said. "And if the Oregon cases connect the way I think they will, we are looking at something much larger." She looked at Dorothy. "Mrs. Harmon, what you did today, collecting that recording, making that walk, asking these men for help, you understand that without a living witness, this case was going nowhere. Margaret Olson and George Patton have families who have been waiting for answers for years." She paused. "You may have just given them those answers." Dorothy thought about Margaret Olson, 81 years old, probably lonely, probably desperate for help the way Dorothy had been desperate, the way everyone who has lost someone and finds themselves alone becomes desperate for the sound of another human voice that seems to care. She thought about George Patton, 79 years old, a veteran most likely, probably proud and stubborn and slow to ask for help until help was the only option left. And then help had come with Carol Steins' warm smile and her professional folder and her eyes that seemed kind. Dorothy thought about the person who would have come after her, some other widow, some other forgotten elder. trapped in their own home, watching their savings disappear, dying slowly while everyone around them believed the licensed caregiver with the excellent references. That person would have been real, would have suffered, would have died. But Dorothy Harmon had walked 2 blocks on arthritic legs and a heart running without medication, and had sat down across from 8 strangers and said 12 words. And that person would now never exist. Stone came to stand beside her as Marcia's team worked through the house. "You did good today, Mrs. Harmon." Dorothy looked at him. She was tired in a way that went all the way down to the center of her. Tired in a way that one long night's sleep would not fix. But underneath the exhaustion, something else was there. Something that had been absent for a very long time. "I almost did not come," she said. "I stood outside that diner for 5 full minutes trying to decide if it was worth the risk." "What made you go in?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "Earl," she said finally. "I thought about what he would have done. He never backed down from something that was right. Not in Korea, not in life. He always said stand up for what is right, even when it is hard." Stone finished quietly. Dorothy looked at him. "Even when it is hard." Outside the patrol car with Carol Steins in the back seat pulled away from the curb on Sycamore Lane. The neighbors watched it go. The blue and red lights faded down the street. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon reassembled itself around the White House with the blue shutters, except that nothing inside that house and nothing about Dorothy Harmon was the same as it had been 2 hours ago. Stone walked her back to his truck. She climbed in, sat with her hands in her lap, the tape recorder still in her cardigan pocket, Earl's wedding photograph tucked against her side where she had carried it for 2 blocks. She looked out the window at the house as Stone pulled away from the curb. The overgrown garden, the closed curtains, the blue shutters. "There is one more thing you need to do," Stone said. Dorothy knew what he meant before he finished the sentence. She had known since the moment Carol's car disappeared down the street. There was one person who deserved to know what had happened. One person who had been sending letters to an address that returned them. One person who thought the silence was intentional, who thought her mother had chosen it, who had been living for months with a version of events that was entirely wrong. Stone reached into his jacket, pulled out a slip of paper. "Your address book," he said, "the one written in your husband's handwriting. We found it in the hallway table. Her number is in there, the old one." Dorothy looked at the slip of paper for a long time. Then she took it. The phone felt heavy in her hand. She sat with it for a moment in the quiet of the truck cab while Stone waited without speaking. She thought about Susan as a little girl running through Earl's garden laughing at nothing, the way children laugh when the world is still simple and parents are still invincible. She dialed. The phone rang once. Dorothy's heart pounded in her chest. The arrhythmia that Carol's fake medication had done nothing to manage for months. The irregular rhythm that reminded her every day of how close she had come to dying alone in her own bedroom, while her daughter somewhere in Portland thought her mother had chosen silence. Twice. 3 times. 4. Dorothy closed her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "Please answer." 5 times. A click. Then a voice. Older than Dorothy remembered. Tired in the way that people get tired when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time. But unmistakably, impossibly, her daughter. "Hello." Dorothy opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her throat had closed entirely. Every word she had planned to say had dissolved. 78 years of life, and she could not form a single syllable. "Hello," Susan said again. "Who is this?" Dorothy forced air through her vocal cords. "Susan," she whispered. "It is Mom." Silence. 5 seconds that contained 7 years of grief and anger and love that never stopped even when everything else did. 5 seconds that felt like standing at the edge of something vast and irreversible. Then Susan's voice cracked down the middle. "Mom, is that really you?" "Yes, baby." Dorothy was crying now freely without trying to stop it. "It is me." Susan started sobbing. The sound of her daughter crying reached through the phone and wrapped around Dorothy's heart. All the anger she had carried, all the justified fury at a daughter who had not come to her father's funeral. None of it mattered, not one piece of it. This was her child. "Mom, I have been trying to reach you for months." Susan's words came out between sobs. "Your number was disconnected. I sent letters to the house. They all came back marked undeliverable. I thought you had decided you did not want to talk to me anymore. I thought you had given up on me." Dorothy's legs went weak. She gripped the door of the truck to keep herself steady. "Susan," she said, "something happened." And then Dorothy Harmon told her daughter everything. The words poured out of Dorothy in the parking lot of Red Fork Diner as the sun moved lower in the western sky. She sat in the passenger seat of Stone's truck, with the door open and her feet on the running board, and she told her daughter everything. Not the version softened for someone who might not believe her. Not the version edited for someone who might worry too much. Everything. From the day Carol Steins arrived with her warm smile and her professional folder, to the morning Dorothy pressed record on Earl's tape recorder, to the 2 blocks she had walked on arthritic legs to ask 8 strangers for help. She told Susan about the fake medication, about the locked bedroom door, about the $47,000 gone, about Margaret Olson and George Patton, the 2 people who had not made it out, about Forge Denton and the debt made in fire on a Korean hillside in 1951, about the tape playing in the kitchen while Carol's face went white. When she finished, Susan was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Mom, I am so sorry. You did not know." Dorothy said, "You tried to call, you sent letters. Carol intercepted everything. This is not your fault. I should have come anyway," Susan said. "After the funeral, after the argument, I should have gotten on a plane and come to that house and knocked on that door and said I was sorry whether you wanted to hear it or not. I told myself you did not want me there. But the truth is I was scared. I was scared you would not let me in." Dorothy looked out through the windshield at the parking lot, the motorcycles lined up in the fading afternoon light, Stone leaning against the front of his truck with his arms crossed, giving her space, watching the street. "I forgave you a long time ago," Dorothy said. "I just did not know how to say it." Another silence. Longer this time. The kind of silence that is not empty, but full of things that are finally, after 7 years, being set down. "I am coming tonight," Susan said. Her voice had changed. The grief was still there, but something else had moved in beside it. The particular steadiness of a nurse practitioner who has made a decision and does not intend to unmake it. "There is a red eye from Portland. I can be there by morning." "Susan, you do not have to." "Yet I do, Mom. I do not care what it costs. I do not care what I have to rearrange. I am not losing any more time." She paused. 7 years. 7 years I spent being angry about things that do not matter anymore. Dad is gone. I cannot get those years back. But you are still here, and I am coming home. Dorothy smiled, the first real smile in 184 days. It felt strange on her face, like a room that had been closed up for too long being opened to the air. "I will be here," she said. "I am not going anywhere." They talked for another hour. Susan told her about Portland, about the hospital where she worked, about her apartment near the waterfront, and then carefully about 2 boys, Tyler and Mason, 12 years old now, twins, loud and energetic and full of questions about the grandmother they had never met. "I have told them about you and Dad," Susan said, "about the garden, about the house on Sycamore Lane. They ask about you all the time, Mom. They want to know you." Dorothy sat with that for a moment. 2 boys she had never held, never read to, never watched blow out birthday candles or chase fireflies or do any of the 1,000 ordinary things that grandmothers watch grandchildren do. She had missed so much, but she was still here, and she was not going to miss any more. Stone drove Dorothy to a place called Haven House that evening. It was a small 2-story building on a quiet street in the next town over. The kind of place that did not put its name on a sign out front. A woman named Elena Voss ran it, 58 years old, former social worker with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen a great deal and chosen every single day to keep going anyway. Elena had built Haven House 12 years ago after her own experience with a predator she had trusted. She understood in the specific and untheoretical way that survivors understand things what it felt like to be in a home that had been turned against you. "You are safe here," Elena told Dorothy when she walked through the door. "Carol does not know this place exists. Nobody does except the people who need it." She showed Dorothy to a small bedroom on the 2nd floor. Clean sheets on the bed, a quilt made from squares of different fabric, each one a different color and pattern, each one representing someone who had come through Haven House and made it to the other side. A window with a view of the garden. A nightstand with a lamp and a stack of books and a box of tissues. And on the door a lock. A real lock. one that worked from the inside. Dorothy stood in the doorway looking at it for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and turned it. The mechanism clicked into place with a clean, solid sound. She stood there with her hand on the lock. For 7 months, she had heard a lock click every night and felt the sound as a weight pressing down on her chest. A reminder of everything that had been taken from her, control over her own door, her own room, her own body moving through her own house. This was the same sound, but it meant something entirely different now. She slept that night, really slept. Not the half-awake vigilance that had defined her nights for 184 days. Not the hyper-alertness of listening for footsteps in the hall. Not the fear of a key turning in an exterior lock. 9 hours. When she woke, the sun was coming through the window and birds were moving in the garden below. And for one clear, uncomplicated moment, before memory reassembled itself, Dorothy Harmon simply felt rested. Then she remembered everything. And she felt rested anyway. Stone picked Susan up from the airport the next morning at 11:15. She came through the arrival's doors with a small bag and the particular look of someone who has not slept and does not care. Same bone structure as her mother. Same determined, set to the jaw. Same eyes that had learned in their different ways to keep going. "Is she okay?" Susan asked before they had cleared the parking structure. "Really okay." Stone thought about Dorothy standing in Carol's kitchen holding Earl's tape recorder. Standing in the path of a woman trying to run, not moving, not backing down. "She is the strongest person I have met in a long time," he said. "You should be proud of her." At Haven House, Susan walked into the common room where Dorothy was sitting by the window with a cup of coffee. The morning light came through the glass and caught the thin gold of her wedding ring. The same ring that had been there for 53 years. The same ring she would sooner have lost a finger than removed. Neither woman moved for a moment. 7 years of silence stood between them in that room. All the things said in hospital corridors and on the phone and at kitchen tables and in the heat of grief that had turned to anger because anger was more manageable than loss. All the things never said. The apologies that had stayed locked up because neither of them knew how to open that particular door. Susan crossed the room. She wrapped her arms around her mother and held on. Both of them were crying, holding each other the way you hold someone when you have understood too late and then just in time. That time is not a resource you can assume you have more of. "I am sorry, Mom," Susan whispered. "I am sorry too," baby Dorothy whispered back. For all of it. They stayed like that for a long time. Two women who had lost each other and were finding their way back through the particular grace that becomes available when pride finally exhausts itself. Later that morning, they sat together on the couch in Haven House's common room. Susan examined the fading bruises on her mother's wrists with the careful attention of someone trained to assess injury, but her eyes were not clinical. They were the eyes of a daughter who was understanding in full, for the first time, what had been done to her mother while she was 300 miles away, thinking the silence was a choice. Susan's voice was very quiet when she spoke. "She is going to prison." Dorothy nodded. Detective Marsh said multiple felony charges. And Oregon may add more if the investigations into Margaret Olson and George Patton go where she thinks they will. Susan looked out the window at Elena's garden. A long moment passed. Then she said, "I have been thinking since you called about what comes next." She turned back to her mother. "I want you to come to Portland with me." Dorothy started to speak. Susan continued, "I have a house, 4 bedrooms, way too big for just me and the boys. There is a room on the second floor that looks out over the Willamette, and in the morning the light comes in, and it is the most peaceful thing you have ever seen." She paused. "I am a nurse practitioner, Mom. I can make sure you are taking the right medication. I have already called a cardiologist in Portland. He can see you next week," Claire Dorothy said. "I do not want to be a burden." Susan took her mother's hands. "Mom, listen to me carefully. You are not a burden. You have never been a burden. You raised me. You taught me how to be a person. You sat with me when I was sick, and you helped me with homework, and you drove me to every practice and rehearsal and school event for 18 years, even when you were running on nothing." She squeezed her mother's hands. "You spent your whole life showing up for me. Let me show up for you now." Dorothy looked at her daughter, saw the little girl who used to climb into bed during thunderstorms. The teenager who had slammed doors and sworn she would be different from her mother and had turned out in all the ways that mattered to be very much the same. The woman who had made a hard choice and carried the weight of it for 7 years, and had come through the other side with her love intact. "The boys," Dorothy said quietly, "Tyler and Mason. They do not know me. I am a stranger to them." Susan smiled. Then it is time they met their grandmother. 3 weeks later, Dorothy Harmon moved to Portland. Iron Covenant MC came to help pack up the house on Sycamore Lane. They moved through the rooms with unexpected gentleness, boxing up Earl's things with the kind of care you give to objects that have earned their weight in meaning. His military medals, his photographs, the American flag from his funeral in its shadow box, his old address book with the careful handwriting. They wrapped each item in paper, labeled each box. In the backyard under the gray November sky, Forge found what they were looking for. One tomato plant that had somehow survived the neglect of 7 months in the coming cold. Scrubby and sparse, holding on with the particular stubbornness of things that have decided not to quit. Dorothy wanted it, said she was bringing it to Portland, said she needed something of Earl's hands to grow in her new home. Forge dug it up carefully, wrapped the root ball in a section of burlap from the garage, set it in a bucket in the back of Stone's truck like something precious. Because it was. The house on Sycamore Lane sold to a young family. A couple with 2 children who talked about the backyard garden and the good light in the mornings and the way the neighborhood felt like the kind of place you could put down roots. They asked Dorothy about the history of the garden. She told them Earl had planted it when he retired, told them the soil was good, told them to keep the tomatoes in the sunniest corner. She signed the papers with steady hands. Then she got into Susan's car and did not look back. The trial took place 4 months later in the county courthouse. Dorothy had been to that building twice in her life before this. Once to renew a license, once to contest a property tax assessment with Earl, who had been convinced he was being overcharged and turned out to be right. She had never imagined walking through those doors for something like this. She walked in with Susan on one side and Stone on the other. All 8 members of Iron Covenant MC sat in the gallery. They had driven from Hargrove for the day. Said they would not miss it. "This is what we do." Stone had told Dorothy on the phone the night before. "We see things through." Carol Stein sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. The professional composure that had sustained her through 7 months of calculated exploitation was entirely gone. Prison had stripped away the polish and the warmth and the practiced expressions and left something smaller and flatter underneath. She did not look at Dorothy when Dorothy came in. The prosecution built their case methodically. Bank records showing $47,000 in unauthorized purchases, credit card statements, wire transfers to accounts registered to shell companies, a complete financial autopsy of Dorothy's life over 7 months. Medical experts testified about the medication tampering, explained what withholding a beta blocker from a patient with arrhythmia could do to an unmonitored heart, called it deliberate, called it a method. One physician, calm and precise in the witness chair, used the word torture without flinching. They read from Carol's planner, the circled number, the circled date, the 2 words written below it, enough, leave. The jury heard those 2 words and understood what they meant. Not remorse, not hesitation, an exit strategy written in ink. Detective Marsh presented the evidence from Margaret Olson and George Patton. The identical financial patterns, the identical progression, the identical timing. Oregon authorities had reopened both investigations. The state examiner had looked again at the medical records with fresh eyes and found irregularities that the original review had not pursued. Both cases were now being treated as homicides. Carol's defense tried everything. They argued that Dorothy was confused, that her memory was unreliable, that the purchases had been authorized, that the medication difference was an honest error by a pharmacy, that the locked door was a documented safety measure for a patient with documented cognitive concerns. The prosecutor played the tape recording. Carol's own voice filled the courtroom. Every person in that room heard her say the words she had believed no one would ever hear. "I told you to stop asking about the money. If you mention it again, I will make sure you regret it." The jury listened without moving. When it was Dorothy's turn to testify, she walked to the witness stand slowly. 78 years old, arthritis in both knees, a heart that was finally, after 4 months of proper medication, beating in something close to its correct rhythm. She settled into the chair, folded her hands in her lap. looked at the jury with the clarity of someone who has decided that nothing in this room can be more frightening than 184 mornings of waking up to a locked door. She told them everything. The defense attorney came at her carefully. Mrs. Harmon, is it not true that you have been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, that you forget things, that you sometimes become confused about events? Dorothy looked at him steadily. I am 78 years old, she said. I forget where I put my reading glasses. I forget the name of the young man who delivers my mail on Thursdays. But I do not forget being locked in my own bedroom. I do not forget bruises on my wrists. I do not forget watching my savings disappear while a woman told me I was too confused to understand my own bank statements. She turned to the jury. I was not confused, she said. I was made to feel confused. There is a difference. And that difference is the reason I am sitting here today instead of being buried in the ground next to Earl while everyone called it natural causes. The defense had no response to that. Before she stepped down, the prosecutor asked if she had anything else she wished to say. Dorothy looked at the jury for a long moment. There were two other people, she said. Margaret Olson, George Patton. They cannot be here. Their voices were silenced, and they did not get the chance to walk into a diner and ask for help and be believed. She paused. I can be here, and I am telling you the truth. I am telling it for myself, and I am telling it for them. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they came back in, Dorothy sat between Susan and Stone with her hands folded and her back straight. Susan was holding her breath. Stone had both hands flat on his thighs in the particular posture of a man who has learned to be very still when the outcome is not yet certain. The foreperson stood, guilty on all counts: elder abuse, financial exploitation, assault, unlawful imprisonment, attempted murder. The courtroom erupted. Susan grabbed her mother's hand and held it with both of hers. In the gallery, Iron Covenant MC responded with the restrained approval of men who had been waiting a long time for this specific word. Forge sat with his eyes closed for a moment, and his lips moving slightly like he was saying something to someone who was not in the room. Carol Stein showed no expression as the judge prepared to address her. Miss Steins, the judge said, you identified vulnerable people at the lowest points of their lives, people who had lost spouses, people who were lonely and frightened and desperate for someone they could trust. And you used that desperation as a weapon. You took their money, you took their dignity, you took their medication and replaced it with something that would do them no good while their bodies failed. You locked doors, you cut off families. You made these people believe they were too confused and too worthless to deserve better. He paused. And then you left, or you planned to. And the people behind you, you plan to leave them with nothing. 2 of them are already gone. We do not know with certainty what you did to them. But the pattern is clear and the investigations are ongoing. He looked at her with a particular expression of someone who has spent many years in courtrooms and has not become accustomed to this. 22 years in federal prison, he said. Full restitution of all stolen funds plus damages. You will be 67 years old if you are released. And if the Oregon investigations result in charges, you will face those as well. He set down his papers. You are a predator, Miss Steins, and predators belong in cages. They led her away. The door closed behind her, and Sycamore Lane and Haven House and Earl's tape recorder and 2 blocks of sidewalk on arthritic legs were folded away into the category of things that had ended the way they were supposed to end, which is not a common category and should never be taken for granted. Outside the courthouse, Dorothy stood in the November sun with Susan beside her, and Stone on her other side, and all 8 members of Iron Covenant MC forming the loose, easy circle they always formed around her now, without discussing it or assigning it a name. It is over, Susan said softly. Dorothy looked up at the sky, blue and cold and enormous. No, she said. It is just beginning. She moved to Portland in the first week of December. Susan's house was a craftsman bungalow 3 blocks from the Willamette. 4 bedrooms, a backyard that backed up to a community garden. The room on the 2nd floor had windows on 2 sides, and in the morning the light came in at an angle that made everything look, as Susan had promised, completely peaceful. Dorothy put Earl's photographs on the nightstand, his flag in its shadow box on the bookshelf, his coffee mug, the dark blue one with the chip on the handle, on the kitchen shelf where she could see it every morning. She put the tomato plant in the sunniest corner of the backyard garden. It took to the new soil with a stubbornness that should not have surprised anyone. Tyler and Mason were exactly as loud and exactly as curious as Susan had warned. 12-year-old twins who came thundering down the stairs the morning Dorothy arrived and stopped 3 feet away from her with identical expressions of uncertainty, not sure what the protocol was for meeting the grandmother you had heard about your whole life and never actually met. Dorothy looked at them, Earl's coloring in their faces somehow, even though he was their grandfather, and they had never met him either. The same determined jaw as Susan. "Well," she said, "are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to help me with these boxes?" That was enough. They descended on the boxes like a small and enthusiastic disaster, carrying things upstairs in the wrong order and arguing about which way the bookshelf should face and asking approximately 400 questions about everything in the boxes. Who was the man in the uniform? Why did the flag have to stay in the triangle? Had she really walked to a diner and asked a bunch of bikers for help? Because that was the coolest thing they had ever heard. Dorothy answered every question, even the ones that were hard, even the ones that required her to sit down first, especially those ones. She got back on her correct medication within the first week. The cardiologist in Portland was thorough and careful and honest, said her heart had shown strain from the months without proper medication. Said with consistent treatment and reasonable activity, she could expect years of good quality life. Said she was, for a woman who had been through what she had been through, remarkably strong. Dorothy did not tell him that she had Earl to thank for that. Some things are private. Therapy began in January. A woman named Dr. Patricia Howe, who worked with survivors of elder abuse and other forms of controlled captivity. She did not rush Dorothy, did not tell her what to feel or when to feel it. Just asked questions and listened to the answers and held the space with the particular skill of someone who understands that healing is not a project with a completion date. The nightmares came less frequently with each passing month. She still woke, sometimes thinking she heard a key turning in a lock. Still had moments in grocery stores when the sight of a certain type of professional-looking woman with a ponytail made her heart rate spike before her brain caught up with her body. But the good days outnumbered the hard ones, and then outnumbered them more. She began volunteering at the Portland Elder Justice Center in February, 3 afternoons a week. She answered the abuse hotline, talked with people who were where she had been, scared, trapped, certain that no one would believe them, that they were too old to matter, that asking for help would only make things worse. She told them her story every time. Not all of it, not all at once, but enough. I was silent for 184 days, she would say. I thought I was too old, too confused, too far gone to be worth saving. I was wrong about all of it. In the first year, she helped 6 people escape situations like hers. 6 people who made phone calls and had meetings and filled out forms and eventually with help got out. 6 people who were alive and free at the end of that year who might not have been either of those things without someone on the other end of the phone who understood from the inside what they were describing. 6 people who were not Margaret Olson, who were not George Patton. Stone called once a month on video. He would show her whatever motorcycle he was working on in the garage. She would show him the tomato plant, which had by the following summer grown tall and strong and produced fruit the deep red of something that has decided it intends to keep living. They would talk for an hour about nothing in particular and everything that mattered, and it always felt, without either of them naming it, like family. Forge called too. He and Dorothy would talk about Earl, about Korea, about the battle at Incheon, and the burning APC and the young private who had reached through the flames because it was the right thing to do and had never asked for anything in return. The debt had been repaid, but the connection remained. Some connections do not dissolve when the original reason for them is resolved. Some connections become their own reason. The charity ride happened every June. Iron Covenant MC organized it. 200 motorcycles raising money for elder abuse prevention programs at 3 different organizations, including the Portland Elder Justice Center. 200 riders who had decided in their various ways that protecting the people who could not protect themselves was not a hobby or a side project, but a fundamental obligation of being the kind of person worth being. The first year, Dorothy attended as a guest. The second year, Stone asked her to speak. She stood at a microphone in the parking lot of Red Fork Diner in Hargrove on a warm June morning with 200 motorcycles behind her and Susan and the boys in the crowd, and all 8 members of Iron Covenant MC in a row to her left in the sun doing what California sun does in June, which is to illuminate everything without mercy or exception. I was 78 years old when I walked through that door, she said. She nodded toward the diner. I had bruises on my wrists and fear in my heart, and I was absolutely certain that no one would believe me, that I was too old, too confused, too far past my useful years to be worth anyone's time or effort or risk. She paused. I was wrong about all of it. She looked out at the crowd. I asked 8 strangers for help, 8 men who had no reason to say yes, who owed me nothing, who had their own lives and their own concerns and their own perfectly good reasons to let someone else handle it. And they said yes, without hesitation, without conditions. They just said yes. She let that sit for a moment. If you see someone suffering, she continued, someone you suspect is being hurt or controlled or exploited, do not look away. Do not tell yourself it is not your business. Do not assume someone else will handle it. She thought about Ruth from next door, about the doctor's office that had stopped questioning why Dorothy always came in with Carol, about the neighbors who had accepted the explanations because accepting was easier than asking. Do not be the person who sees and turns away, because you might be the only person who sees. You might be the only one who can ask. And the person who needs help might be waiting for that question the way I waited for someone to walk through a door. She looked at Stone, at Forge, at all of them. These men answered when I asked, she said, and they saved my life. Not because they knew me, not because they owed me anything, but because they understood that some things are simply the right thing to do. She straightened her shoulders. Be the person who does the right thing. When someone asks for help, say yes. Always. The crowd gave her a standing ovation that started before she had finished the last word. Susan was crying in the audience. Tyler and Mason were holding up a sign they had made the night before at the kitchen table, big letters in marker, "Go Grandma Brave." Forge gave a slow military salute, the kind that carries the weight of everyone who gave it before you. Stone wiped his eyes and did not pretend otherwise. After the rally, Dorothy and Stone and Forge sat on the curb outside Red Fork Diner, eating ice cream from cups because the cones kept falling apart in the June heat. 3 people connected by a debt that had traveled across 70 years, in a Korean winter, in a burning armored vehicle, in 184 days of silence, in 2 blocks of sidewalk, and 12 words spoken to 8 strangers on a Tuesday afternoon. Earl would have liked this, Dorothy said. He would have liked all of it, Forge said. He would have complained about the heat and then stayed all day anyway. Stone laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind that makes people nearby look over and smile without knowing why. Dorothy looked at the Iron Covenant patch on his vest, the lightning bolt striking the winding road. You never told me what it means, she said. Stone looked down at it, thought for a moment. Sometimes life throws storms at you, he said, things that seem like they should break you. Thunder and lightning and roads that are so dark you cannot see what is ahead. He traced the image with one finger. But if you keep riding, if you do not stop, if you keep moving forward even when the road is hard and the sky is as dark as it gets, he looked at her. You find your way through. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. I fought my way through, she said. Stone shook his head. That is exactly right, Evie. There is a difference and it matters. She looked at that for a moment, turned it over. A woman who had been told for 184 days that she was too old and too confused to matter. Who had been locked in her own bedroom and had her medication replaced with vitamins and had her daughter's letters intercepted and her neighbors turned away. Who had been systematically reduced piece by piece, day by day, until the woman who had spent 53 years beside a man who reached into fire for strangers had nearly become someone who did not believe her own experience. Nearly. But she had kept Earl's tape recorder, had remembered the address book hidden at the back of the hallway drawer, had walked 2 blocks on a failing heart, because his voice in her memory said, stand up for what is right even when it is hard, especially when it is hard, and she had decided on the 185th morning that she believed him. Same time next year, she asked. Stone nodded. Would not miss it. Forge stood stretched. Until then, Evie, take care of yourself and those grandkids. Dorothy stood. brushed off her pants, hugged them both, stone first, and then forge, and held on for a moment longer than a brief goodbye requires, because some goodbyes have the weight of everything that had to happen for you to be standing in this place, saying them, and that weight deserves to be acknowledged. Then she walked to Susan's rental car where her daughter and her grandsons were waiting. Tyler was already in the front seat arguing that he was old enough to sit there. Mason was in the back with his sign still rolled under his arm. Susan was leaning against the car with her arms crossed and the expression she always had when Tyler was arguing something that was never going to work. Dorothy got in. The car smelled like sunscreen and the granola bars Mason had eaten on the drive down, and very faintly under everything, like the particular combination of her daughter's shampoo and whatever soap Susan had used since she was a teenager, a smell Dorothy had not been able to identify for years as home, and now recognized it completely. "Ready?" Susan asked. Dorothy buckled her seatbelt. "Ready," she said. 2 years later, Dorothy Harmon sat in her garden in Portland on a warm August afternoon. The tomato plant she had brought from Sycamore Lane had produced every summer without fail. It had grown tall and spread in the way of things that have found good soil and decided to stay. She had planted more around it: peppers, basil, rosemary, thyme, the same herbs Earl had grown, the same combinations. When she worked in that garden in the early mornings or before the August heat came on with her hands in the soil and the smell of the plants around her, it was not grief she felt. It was something closer to company. Tyler and Mason came through the back door with the particular lack of warning that defined them. "Grandma Brave," Tyler said, "tell us the story." Mason sat down into the grass next to her without being asked. He had been doing this since the first week Dorothy moved in, just sitting next to her, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he had been doing it his whole life. Dorothy set down her gardening tools, wiped her hands on her apron. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a woman who was very scared. She had been hurt by someone she trusted." Dorothy continued, "And she had been quiet about it for so long that she had started to believe she deserved to be quiet, that she was too old to matter, that no one would help her even if she asked." "What happened?" Tyler asked. He knew the answer. He had known the answer since the third time she told it. He asked anyway because some stories need to be told more than once. Because some stories are still working on you the 100th time you hear them. "She walked into a diner," Dorothy said, "and she saw 8 men who looked like the last people in the world you would ask for help. Big and rough and wearing leather and looking like they had been through things that most people only see in movies. And she walked straight up to them. Because she was brave," Mason said. "Because she was desperate," Dorothy said honestly. "And because she heard her husband's voice in her memory telling her to stand up for what is right even when it is hard. And she decided that being quiet was more dangerous than speaking." Did they help her? Dorothy looked at her grandsons, these 2 boys she had almost never met, who called her Grandma Brave and drew her pictures and sat beside her in gardens without being asked. "They said something she will never forget," Dorothy said. "They said you are safe here." She took each boy's hand, Mason on her left, Tyler on her right. The August sun warm on all 3 of them. And she was, Dorothy said. For the first time in a very long time, she was. Mason looked up at her. "You were the woman," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, baby, I was." Tyler was quiet for a moment. He was the one who thought before he spoke, which Susan said he had gotten from Earl, which Dorothy thought was probably true. "Are you scared anymore?" he asked. Dorothy looked up at the sky, blue and enormous, and full of the particular Portland light that came in from the west in summer afternoons. She thought about Earl, about the life they had built together over 53 years, about the last words he had ever said to her, about the lock on her bedroom door and the tape recorder in her cardigan pocket, and 2 blocks of sidewalk and 12 words and everything that had come after. She thought about Margaret Olson and George Patton, who had not made it out, whose names she said every time she spoke at a rally or answered a call at the Elder Justice Center, whose absence was a reminder of what silence costs when it goes on too long. She thought about 6 people who had called a hotline and been believed and gotten out. She thought about 2 boys in a garden who called her brave, and a daughter who had come home, and 8 men in leather vests who had said yes without being given a reason to. "No," she said, "I am not scared anymore." Mason leaned against her shoulder. "Because you learned that asking for help is not weakness," he said. He had heard this part too, many times. Dorothy smiled. Because I learned that asking for help is not weakness, she said. It is the bravest thing there is. And because I learned something else. What Tyler asked, she squeezed both their hands. There are always people willing to help, she said. You just have to be brave enough to ask. The garden smelled like summer. Somewhere down the street, a motorcycle engine rumbled past deep and steady. Tyler looked up. Mason grinned. Dorothy listened to the sound until it faded. Then she picked up her gardening tools and went back to work in the soil that Earl's love had taught her to tend in the city where her daughter lived, in the life she had fought her way back to on an ordinary August afternoon that she intended to remember for the rest of her years.